Hey, what's up guys? Joker here. Today we're going to be taking a look at the PC performance for Gears of War 4. We're going to be testing on the GTX 1080 as well as the RX 480 versus the GTX 1060 here. And of course I am using the latest drivers here from NVIDIA's AMD, who both put out new drivers just before this game came out. So for NVIDIA, that's 373.06, and for AMD, it's 16.10.1. So those are the drivers that we are using here for our performance testing. And before we get into those numbers, we will take a brief look over the options menu so you get an idea of the options that I was using, which was the Ultra settings. I had everything in here up at Ultra besides motion blur. I did have that turned off because I just don't like using it. You can see in here that we do have scaled resolution, so you can put this all the way up to 300% if you want. So if you're playing on like a 1440p monitor, you can get this thing all the way up to 8K, or you can bring it down if you want, if you need to get some better performance and you need to scale down your resolution. We do have an unlocked frame rate option in here, so if you are running over 60 Hz monitor and you want to have an unlimited frame rate, then you can go ahead and use that, and you can turn VSync on or off. We also do have a FOV slider, which goes from 60 all the way up to 100, so nice to see that they have included that here. They also have a show stats option. This allows you to monitor not only your frame rate, but if you have it up on the all option, it actually will give you detailed information like your video memory and GPU usage, all of that good juicy stuff. And we are going to be relying on that heavily for our side-by-side comparison, because the MSI Afterburner overlay is not working with this game because it is a UWP title. Even though I'm on the latest version that works with DirectX 12, it does not work with the UWP title, so that's why we can't use the traditional Afterburner overlay that I usually do prefer to use. Everything else in here you can see I do have up at Ultra, except motion blur, I do have that turned off. And we also got down here, there are a couple options that actually go up to insane, being the screen space reflections and the depth of field. But I'm not using those right now because those are, as mentioned by the developers, they're optimized for SLI users and for future cards that are going to be coming out in the future. Because if you put up the screen space reflections, you're going to see your FPS like pretty much get cut in half almost immediately. That is how taxing that option is. And personally, to me, it is not worth, for the visual impact that it brings, it is definitely not worth, seeing your frame rate get cut from like 90 down to 45. Totally not worth it. I mentioned SLI there. It is not supported in the game right now at launch, but again, the developers said that that is something that's going to be supported post-launch. So if you're an SLI user out there and you're on the fence about, picking up this game, then maybe you might want to wait until that patch becomes available to you if you don't think your single GPU is going to be able to handle it based on the numbers that we're going to be looking here in just a moment. Everything else in here, though, I do have cranked all the way up. You can see even the particle spawn rate and the sharpening. I even pushed all of those over to the right. There's an advanced options settings in here where you can turn off things like async compute. I did leave that on. Dynamic resolution scaling and tiled resources, I turned that off because those are things that are designed to optimize the game to perform a little bit better, but they can also dynamically change the visuals on the screen as you're playing the game, and I want to have consistent visuals when I'm doing my benchmarking. So those are things that I chose to turn off, but we are using the async compute option. And before we get into the numbers, I do want to mention that this game is supporting ultra-wide. We're going to include some numbers here for the GTX 1080 at 3440 by 1440, but you can see right here the game is scaling well for 21:9 users. It's taking up the full sides of the screen and adding extra detail onto there for you guys who are out there using 21:9 displays. Gears of War 4 does include an in-game benchmark if you want to use it. It is a pretty good tool, and I've actually found that it was fairly accurate compared to the numbers that I'm going to be giving you guys here in just a moment. All of my benchmarking was actually done in-game, though. I did my benchmarking within the single player, playing through the entire first mission from start to finish. So I didn't use the benchmark here for any of these numbers, but if you guys do want to use the benchmark, it is built in there, and I will be showing some side-by-side footage with the GTX 1060 and the RX 480 when we do get into those numbers. But we're going to start off here with the GTX 1080 at 1080p and 1440p up at those ultra settings, just like I showed you in the options menu. And you can see at 1080p, the GTX 1080 pulled in an average of 104 FPS and a minimum of 72. And then we bumped it up to 1440p. We got an average of 91 and the minimum at 67. So the GTX 1080 is easily handling both of these resolutions at 1080 and 1440. When we did bump that up to 4K, keeping it at Ultra, that was not the case. We did see the average drop down all the way to 43 FPS, but thankfully this game actually does scale pretty well, so if you are a 4K user out there, you could certainly get in there and tweak some of those options in order to get this game to play at 60 frames per second. And we did get a minimum there on the 4K at 37, so that was rather low. Like I said though, get in there, tweak those options a little bit, and you still should be able to get a very enjoyable experience on a single GTX 1080, even at 4K. This game is running pretty damn well here day one. They've done a really good job, in my personal opinion. Looking at 3440 by 1440 at Ultra as well, we got an average of 72 FPS and a minimum of 53, so perfectly playable frame rates there for you if you are playing at the ultra-wide resolution. Now we're going to switch over to the mid-range test system with the RX 480 and the GTX 1060. This is tested in my i5 6600K build. The GTX 1080 was tested with my i7 6800K. I forgot to mention that a moment ago. But like I said here, with the RX 480 and the GTX 1060, it's with the i5 6600K, and that is overclocked to 4.9 gigahertz. So starting with that AMD RX 480 at 1080p, we see an average of 85 FPS and a minimum of 68. And when we switched over to 1440p, still at Ultra here, we got an average of 55 and a minimum of 47. So even at 1440p, we could see the RX 480 still putting up playable numbers there at 55 FPS. And if you tweak a couple of options, you're probably going to be sailing over 60 all the time. When we switched over to the GTX 1060, once again, the 1080p at Ultra got an average of 84 FPS, so only losing to the RX 480 by 1 FPS, while the minimum was 61 FPS. So they did lose to the AMD RX 480 by 7 frames there on the minimum, but the average is 84 versus 85, so that's pretty much a neck-and-neck tie. And then at 1440p Ultra, the story stays the same with it being really close to the RX 480, pulling in an average of 55 FPS, so a dead tie there at 1440p, and a minimum of 45 versus the 47 that we saw on the RX 480. So, I mean, those numbers are so close that this is basically almost a deadlock tie between the RX 480 and the GTX 1060. The RX 480 does slightly edge it out here in the in-game testing, but only just ever so slightly. So it really is pretty much a tie in my personal opinion. You guys could let me know down in the comments below what you think about the numbers. If you're running an RX 480 or a GTX 1060, chances are you should be able to play this game really well at 1080p or 1440p. They've done a great job optimizing this game on both sides of the fence this time around. I did also use the in-game benchmark with the RX 480 and the GTX 1060 so that I could do a straight side-by-side comparison with those as well, so we could watch the frames on that, and those numbers came actually really close to the in-game testing that I did. So the benchmark here with this game is actually pretty accurate, I would say, to what you're going to see when you are playing the game. But on that benchmark, once again, at the averages at 1080p, I saw 86 FPS on the 1060 and the 480, so a dead tie. And then at 1440p, I saw an average of 59 on the 1060 and 58 on the RX 480. So only a 1 FPS difference there at 1440p on the built-in game benchmark. So like I said, really a tie here between the mid-range cards from AMD and NVIDIA with the 1060 and the RX 480 here on the latest generation. So that's all I've got here for you today, guys, on Gears of War 4 with the PC performance. If I had to give it something, I'd give it my blessing. It seems to be optimized really well for both sides of the fence, as I mentioned here. So if you're going to be picking up Gears of War 4, let me know what you're getting, what kind of system you're running down in the comments below, and we can discuss. And if there's anything I didn't answer here for you guys, maybe I can do that down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to go ahead and stick a like on it and subscribe if you're not already. And yeah, I'll catch you guys next time. Tara.